joined in studio, but now by the president of the Mississippi Energy Institute, Patrick Sullivan, is joining us. Patrick, how you doing today, man?
Hey, I'm good. Good to be here on a Monday.
Well, it was either this or be at the office.
True.
Yeah, so we bailed you out.
Thank you.
We expect cookies. Now, the thing we've got you in here to talk about, and it ties into what we were talking about last hour with inflationary pressures and everything going just ridiculous. The energy sector, we see a lot of different areas around the world and around America where is it fair to say they seem to have lost their minds when it comes to their energy policies?
Yeah, it's very fair. Look, these are very unique times, and I'm glad that that your network is covering this issue because it's something that everybody needs to start paying attention to. You know, everybody feels it at home when we get the electricity bill or we go to the gas pump, but there are some things happening around the globe and even in parts of the U.S. where it's not an issue of just high prices. It is also an issue of can they keep the lights on? Are there employers, major manufacturers, people that depend on these employers to go to work every day? Are they going to continue to operate? And I know in Europe right now, I guess the best way to say it is, through years of decisions, they have absolutely screwed their economy.
Yeah.
And these are not decisions that were made last week or last year. Now, there's probably a handful of those that were bad decisions, but these are decisions that were made 10 years, 20 years or more ago. It is progression of decisions, and what it's done is it has choked their energy supply to where they just don't have enough of it. And when you don't have enough of it, you've got not only high price problems, you've got do the lights come on problems. And
even if you paid your bill,
exactly,
it doesn't matter.
And so you read the number of stories. At this point, it's a daily news cycle. You read the number of stories and manufacturers who are making comments like, well, energy is the foundation of our business. We can't do business here anymore. We're going to go to the U.S. or parts of the U.S. where we know energy is reliable, and it's not everywhere in the U.S. California's having the same issues, and people need to start paying attention because these decisions were made by people who are elected to public positions, years and years of bad decisions, saying, well, we don't like that source of energy, and so we're going to do everything we can to make sure we don't have to use it. Well, there's a cost for that, and the cost is the lights don't come on.
Well, and great example of that in the last couple of weeks, California, they signed, Governor Newsom signed into law, banning all gas-powered cars by, I think, 2032. I think it's 10 years. And then a few hours later announced that there may be blackouts and you need to ration your energy and don't charge your electric cars during these hours every day because it'll overload the grid. Do they not even hear what they're saying?
Well, yeah, I think one thing that's misunderstood is just the sheer scale of everything in energy. And certainly politicians, or most politicians at least, don't understand. I was actually in D.C. last week, and you see Joe Manchin, Senator Manchin's name in the news a good bit, and we were with him, and I asked him, I said, for his Democrat colleagues, because we have Democrats here in Mississippi who understand the value of the energy sector and the importance, so we don't deal with it quite like they do in D.C., but I asked him, do you think it is a issue of that it is more like a religious cult of we don't want any oil and gas or fossil fuels, or you think it's just more of his Democrat colleagues having just ignorance of, and his answer was he does think it's more like a political religion, and I think that's where we are. It's almost like a religious crusade. Anything that comes up that's associated with oil and gas or coal, they're automatically against it, whether it reduces emissions or not. And so we get into this situation where a lot of people don't know coal use globally is going up. Oil being transported, not by pipeline where it's most efficient and requires the least emissions, but by train or by truck in the U.S. is the highest it's ever been. And so we're making all of these decisions that not only choke supply, but also result in in the very thing that we're trying to increase emissions, the things that we're trying to reduce. And so it is nonsensical.
Well, and the problem is, and let's go back to something you and I talked about before we came on the air, and you mentioned it kind of just a second ago. We keep hearing things like, you know, got to open up the drilling, got to open up the leases, got to do this, got to do that. That'll solve everything. It's not that simple. It's the decisions and the things that were done 10, 20 years ago that have us where we're at now. It's not the stuff being done right now. Is that right?
Yeah, it gets into the scale of energy required and the long-term capital-intensive nature of it. Yes, there's no switch that anybody can go flip somewhere to turn on an increase of supply. So let's go back to Europe. Years ago, they started choking the sources of energy that they could produce at home. One of them was nuclear, by the way, which is emissions-free. They reduced that, and so what resulted in time was greater dependence on Russian natural gas. I mean, can you imagine that?
That's not going very well for them right now either.
Exactly, and so in New England, we've gotten to the point where every year, every winter, when we get a cold snap, they're in short supply of natural gas. Well, there's more natural gas produced in Pennsylvania and Ohio than they can sell. But New York, the state of New York, refuses to allow pipelines to be built from their neighbor, Pennsylvania. So you know what's resulted is every winter, and we won't see it this winter because of what's going on in Ukraine, but every winter there's been Russian tankers with LNG offloading natural gas, not from Pennsylvania, but from Russia.
Yeah. And they wonder why people get so angry about all of this, because you can see all of this. We can see all of this if you're paying attention. There's no reason for it. And you mentioned a second ago, and let's talk about this for a few minutes here, and we got a break coming up. We'll continue through that. We don't have these problems in Mississippi. The Californias and the Texas and the New York and all of the places where we keep seeing blackouts and brownouts and, you know, don't do this and don't do that. We don't have those same problems here. Why is that?
Well, we live and it's not just Mississippi. I think it's our region of the country. We have energy production here. We have oil and gas production. We have logical-minded politicians on both sides of the aisle who look at it and say, because they live next door to people that work in the business, everybody, of course, has an energy bill. And so we value the energy sector, and we're smart enough here. It hasn't become this political religion here yet, and that's what we got to guard against. Okay, keeping that out, because it is a very real thing and very organized and very sophisticated in other parts of the country, but not here. And so that is a silver lining for us. Is as we look at economic growth, that growth, especially manufacturing-based growth and things that are energy-intensive, are going to naturally migrate to the places where there is a reliable source of energy. And here's Mississippi right in the middle of the Southeast. I think we can actually outcompete a lot of places on our story of energy reliability. And so it's something that we ought to pay careful attention to and not only recognize as a strength, but as I think things are going to get worse in some of these other places. As you said, there is no quick fix. And they're not reversing course. They're continuing to press forward on all the decisions that got them in this situation in the first place. And so I do think there's an economic opportunity as businesses leave these other places for Mississippi to be a home for those.
Why do you think it's not taking hold here? I mean, obviously we're smart. But aside from that, is it because you think in part that so many people are involved in the energy sector here in this region? I mean, Louisiana, you go to South Louisiana, it is oil country. It is all oil and gas, 100%. A lot of people from here, from Mississippi, drive down there and work. A lot of people are involved in it. Do they know that there's not a receptive house waiting for them here, so they don't really try?
Yeah, well, I've always said that energy is not a political issue. It is much more of a regional issue. You have different ways of thinking when you go from region to region. It's becoming a political issue. It has become a political issue in Washington, not in Mississippi, but in Washington and in other places around the world. But I do think here it's much more of a culture, and people aren't have 1 or 2 degrees of separation from it. So they have close personal ties to the industry, and so they see the value in it, see what it can do for families and communities.
You see, you've got it better than you thought. You're at least 2 degrees removed from stupid. So right there, that's a bonus. I like that. We've got Patrick Sullivan in studio with us, the president of the Mississippi Energy Institute, and we'll continue talking to him about this. It's fascinating, and I read your op-ed piece, great piece. The chickens are coming home to roost, indeed, but there are some things they're doing in Europe that are just mind-boggling to me that they're telling people to do. I want to mention that when we come back, if we can.
Sure.
We'll do that when we return here in the Element Wealth Studios on Middays. Studios, Dave Hughes here, Patrick Sullivan in studio with us, the president of the Mississippi Energy Institute. They're telling them in Europe they can only shower for 5 minutes. Over in England, aren't they?
We better watch out.
So, to save energy, it's important.
Well, don't shower more than 5 minutes. Don't turn your thermostat below 79 degrees. You don't go on vacation this summer. All sorts of behavioral changes.
I'm glad you mentioned that. During the summer, you're not supposed to turn your thermostat below 79. During the winter, their guideline, you're not supposed to turn it above 66 for your heat.
Well, you better throw an extra log on the fire. Wait a second. We can't do that.
No. You're impacting the forestry then, and that's a whole different thing. It's this kind of stuff that they come out and they say with a straight face, while at the same time putting the policies in place to make a bad situation worse. That's almost mind-boggling to me, Patrick. I mean, and like I said, they say it with a straight face. Like, this is normal. This is just the way it is.
Well, yeah. Sorry. It's just having government officials often, this may be hard to believe, government officials are often not experts in policy matters. And so the case of, just as we titled the column, the chickens are coming home to roost. And so I think a lot of these decisions through the years have been made to make people feel good. Without really any in-depth look, because obviously if anybody would have looked at the issues in depth or scratched the surface just a little bit, they would have very quickly taken another course. But here we are, and so let's talk about what real energy policy looks like. Real energy policy is based on supply, and we've got enough information and data at hand these days to know how much energy we use, what the demands are, and getting back to the issue of scale. The scale it really is almost incomprehensible how much we use and where all it is and how present it is in everything, and it really does take all of those sources. And so when you start to take sources of energy off the table, as these other places have done, that's when you really start to get in trouble. So then you get over-reliant on one energy source, in this case, in the case of Germany, something that comes from Russia, which that's incomprehensible too, why you would want to put yourself in that situation. But I think that's why the places that do well in the U.S., just a few years ago, the U.S. was the dominant energy producer in the world, and we've started to give away that advantage. Hopefully we'll pick it back up as soon as we can, but we're going the wrong direction at the moment.
One thing, and let me ask you, you're the guy to ask this question, because one of the problems that they're having in California with their power grid right now is they shut down one of their nuclear power plants, the big one, that was providing enough power. I think it's like 1.6 million homes. It was providing enough power to power all of those, and they shut it down. I realize the arguments. I have heard them over and over and over. What's the problem with nuclear? Why don't we lean into that a bit more?
Yeah, nuclear's great. The nuclear to me is really the litmus test for this. All of the arguments, the anti-energy arguments are cloaked in emissions reductions, right? And so nuclear is really the true test. If people actually believe that there was an existential threat, then they would be clamoring not only to maintain nuclear power production, but to increase it. That's not happening. And so a few years ago in the U.S., we had 104 nuclear reactors. That started to decrease. We have 98 operating today. Grand Gulf here in Mississippi is one of the newer ones. It was built in the 80s, but it has a life as of current plans. It'll stop operating in 2044. So all of the power plants, the nuclear power plants in the U.S., will start to shut down here in the next 20 years. Do you hear anything
No.
about, hey, we need to figure out a way to replace the nuclear plants, not only replace them, but add to them, because this is a great emissions-free source of power and baseload power. Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion about wind and solar. So wind and solar, they have a good complementary place in there, but they can't replace baseload power like nuclear because obviously they only generate at certain times. They're intermittent sources of power. And so to me, really, if this was not, we got to call it what this is, an all-out war against the oil and gas industry. That's what's going on. If it was not that, I think one of the things that you would be seeing would be a real effort to increase nuclear power production in the U.S., and that's not happening.
Yeah, because that's an easy solution to all of their supposed problems with oil and gas, but they don't want an easy solution because there's no money in it.
Well,
there's no power in it.
And we've got roughly 100 plants to replace here in the next 20 years, and there's nothing going on there really. And if we had a power company in Mississippi that decided today that it may be a good idea to build a nuclear plant for its customers, just because we have a very onerous, overly onerous regulatory process, that's a 20-year process. And so, those are more chickens that are coming home to roost here in the next 20 years is we are slowly losing our nuclear power business in the U.S., which is our largest source of emissions-free power.
Yeah, and that one in California, like I said, providing enough power to power 1.6 million homes, that goes away. Well, those 1.6 million homes still want to turn the switch and have the light come on, so it's got to come from somewhere.
I hope Nevada's building power plants.
They've got the land. It's perfect. Somebody needs to do something here. And that's we keep coming back to the same thing, the bureaucracy, the political influence on the energy industry. Is there any way to back it out of that and get it back to where we're just concentrating like we were 30, 40, 50 years ago on increasing power generation and not worrying about all the political cultism and everything else?
Well, you hate to say it, but at least my view is it's. I think it's going to require a lot of pain. I think it's going to require, a lot more instances like what they're dealing with in California now, what they've dealt with in New England on short supply, what they're dealing with in Europe. Because if you think about it, through the years, the energy sector has performed so well in the U.S. Every time we turn the light switch on, the lights come on. For the most part, we've dealt with some challenges recently and in different times through the years. For the most part, we've had very affordable fuel at the pumps, electricity. That's starting to change. And I think the importance of having these conversations with the public, the more the public education level goes up in awareness to understand the causes of what's happening, the better off we're going to be. But again, I hate to say it, but I think it's going to, in places, it's going to get worse before it gets better.
In 22 years, Grand Gulf is going to kind of age out, basically. What's that going to do to the cost of energy for the average homeowner in the state when that shuts down and we don't have anything nuclear to replace it with? Well,
it's hard to say at this point. I suppose there's a chance that life could be extended even beyond that. There's still time to replace that generating asset with newer nuclear technology. In Mississippi, we're heavy dependent on natural gas for electricity. I don't think the right policy is to have all of your electricity generated from natural gas. We're roughly about 80% in Mississippi, and so people are seeing that in their bills right now when natural gas is 2 or 3 times higher than it was just 2 years ago. this winter, people really start to notice natural gas prices when we start paying our heating bills. It's going to be a big shock from where it was just a year ago. But to sum all that, I think we're going to take care of what we have here in Mississippi, and I think what I mean by that is that we understand that we need to keep our energy supply at a level above what our demand is. The best case for us is that we're exporting energy. Same for our country. Our country's leader right now, they don't believe that philosophy. But I think from an economic competitiveness perspective here in the Southeast, I think we need to latch on to that strength and grow it.
Just very quickly, less than 30 seconds, hard to ask. Is there anything Mississippi can do right now to position themselves better to take better advantage of that?
Well, I think it's marketing. I think a lot of people have said oftentimes we have a lot to sell here in Mississippi through the years. Maybe we haven't done the best we could at selling it. I think our energy strength is something that we should absolutely be very intentional about selling.
And that's something that you never hear mentioned, and that's why I'm glad you came in to talk to us today, Patrick. Patrick Sullivan, president of the Mississippi Energy Institute. Keep up the good work and keep us up to date. And I'll be curious to see if anybody ever decides to replace Grand Gulf, because that day is coming.
It's coming.
At some point, we got to do something about it. We'll continue on Middays in the Element Wealth Studios next.